Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel. We're a group of writers from Vancouver who just enjoy narrative. And what we do here on Tuesday nights is we read crazy, weird, disjointed, and often surprisingly dark fairy tales and folk tales from history, largely from books from the 16th to 19th century when they started collecting folktales and do such things. And we're going to read folktales from two books tonight. But if you are new here and this is your first time watching the show, you should know that down in the description below, there will be little timestamps if you are not watching this live. If you are watching this live, you're stuck with me at the pace I talk. But if you're not watching this live, you can click and jump ahead to any of the stories that we read tonight, of which there will be at least two. The first one we're going to read is called The Blue Belt, which is the one that is about what the title of this stream is, which is a murderous grandmother, which kind of ruins the first twist of the story, but honestly, gotta sell them seats, as they say. Let's realize this is a little off for me. Come on, can we... There we go. It's a little better. So we're going to read that one first. That one's a longer one. It'll probably take us to about half past. Well, half past beginning this. In my time, it'll probably take me to about 7 p.m. Then we will carry on reading a little bit more of Mikko the Fox, which is a story we've been reading over several episodes in this sort of tail end of about the last month of episodes, because it's a multi-part thing about a little fox who is an absolute psychopath, and we're going to work our way through it. And just because that kind of multi-part stuff doesn't always do so well on YouTube, I'm sort of putting it in the back half for those who want to come by and watch it. It is an interconnected tale, but not so interconnected that you couldn't just stay and watch it tonight and watch the others later, and you'd be doing just fine. But if you really want to, they started with the first parts are the Mikko the Fox video, which is in the Fireside Fairytales playlist on this channel. And then they are in the tail end. Again, you can use the timestamps of every video after that to this one. And a few after this one if you're watching this later, because we won't be concluding it tonight. GS is in the chat and says, "Good evening. You know those grandmas?" I do. Now, normally the grandma, as I mentioned earlier, on I think it was Instagram and Twitter, normally the grandma is a kind of respite from the evil of the world. But in this one, let me just frame this up, very strange and very dark tale, with a lot of strange twists and turns in it. The grandma is not so much that. This story definitely has the sort of old world callous disregard for life. Which, okay. There's kind of like a few different phases of this. So there's sort of like in it, the more modern the folktale or fairy tale, you'll have sort of a hero and then maybe somebody gets sick and dies. In the sort of like Middle Ages kind of stuff and further back than that, you start to get this kind of like the hero crushes who's in their way. But if you go really far back to like primitive, kind of Greco-Roman stuff and whatever else, there's just some people you don't care about dying, apparently, or you're not supposed to. And this story definitely touches into that level of history. So, this story is called The Blue Belt, and it comes from East of the Sun and West of the Moon, Old Tales from the North. Once on a time there was an old beggar woman who had gone out to beg. She had a little lad with her, and when she got her bag full, she struck across the hills towards her own home. So when they had gone a bit up the hillside, they came upon a little blue belt, which lay where two paths met. And the lad asked his mother's leave to pick it up. "No," said she, "maybe there's witchcraft in it." And so with threats she forced him to follow her. But when they'd gone a bit further, the lad said he must turn aside for a moment, out of the road. Meanwhile his mother sat down on a tree stump. But the lad was a long time gone, for as soon as he got so far into the wood that the old dame could not see him, well, unsurprisingly, he ran off to where the belt lay, took it up, tied it about his waist, and lo, he felt as strong as if he could lift the whole hill. When he got back, the old dame was in a great rage and wanted to know where he'd been all that while. "You don't know how much time you waste, and yet you know the night is drawing on, and we must cross the hill before it is dark." So on they tramped, but when they got about halfway, the old dame grew weary and said she must rest under a bush. "Dear mother," said the lad, "mayn't I just go up top of this high crag while you rest, and try if I can't see some sign of folk hereabouts?" Yes, he might do that. So when he had got to the top, he saw a light shining from the north. So he ran down and told his mother, "We must get on, mother. We are near a house, for I see a bright light shining quite close to us in the north." Then she rose, shouldered her bag, and set off to see. But they hadn't gone too far before they stood a steep spur of the hill right across their path. So like a cliff. "Just as I thought," said the old dame. Now we can't go a step farther. A pretty bed we shall have here." But the lad took a bag under one arm and his mother under the other and ran straight up the steep crag with them. "Now don't you see? Don't you see what we are close to a house? Don't you see that bright light?" But the old dame said those were no Christian folk, but trolls, for she was at home in all that forest far and near and knew there was not a living soul in it, until you were well over the ridge and had come down on the other side. But they went on, and in a little while they came to a great house, all painted red. "What's the good?" said the old dame. "We daren't go in, for here the trolls live." Sorry, I already got a bit of a dry voice here. "Don't say so, we must go in. There must be men where the light shines so," said the lad. So in he went, and his mother after him. But he'd scarce opened the door before she swooned away, for she saw a great, stout man, at least 20 feet high, sitting on a bench. "Good evening, grandfather," said the lad.
"Well, here I've sat for 300 years, said the man who sat on the bench, "and no one has ever come and called me grandfather before."
Then the lad sat down by the man's side and began to talk to him as if they'd been old friends.
"But what's come over your mother?" said the man, after they had chatted a while. "I think she swooned away."
By the way, that means like passed out. It's a bit of an old-timey way of saying it, though.
"You'd better look after her."
So the lad went and took hold of the old dame and dragged her up the hall along the floor. That brought her to herself, and she kicked and scratched and flung herself about, till at last she sat down upon a heap of firewood in the corner. But she was so frightened that she scarce dared look one in the face. After a while, the lad asked if he could spend the night there.
"Yes, to be sure," said the man.
So they went on talking again, but the lad soon got hungry and wanted to know if they could get food as well as lodging.
"Of course," said the man, "that might be got too."
And after he'd sat a long while, he rose up and threw 6 loads of dry pitch pine on the fire. This made the old hag still more afraid. for she thought, well, in her own words, "Oh no, he's going to roast us alive," she said, and sat in the corner. She said in the corner where she sat. And when the wood had burned down to glowing embers, up got the man. By the way, glowing embers is where they roast meat. Up got the man and strode out of his house. "Heaven bless and help us, what a stout heart you have got," said the old dame. "Don't you see we have got amongst trolls?" Stout being like brave. "Stuff and nonsense," said the lad. "No harm if we have." In a little while, back came the man with an ox so fat and big, the lad had never seen its like, and he gave it one blow with his fist under the ear, and down it fell dead on the floor. And when that was done, he took it up by all four legs, and laid it down on the glowing embers, and turned it and twisted it about till it was burnt brown outside. After that, he went to a cupboard and took out a great silver dish and laid the ox on it. Then the dish was so big that none of the ox hung over any side. This he put on the table. Then he went down into the cellar and fetched a cask of wine, knocked out the head, and put the cask on the table together with 2 knives, which were each 6 feet long. When this was done, he bade them go, sit down to supper and eat. So they went, and the lad first began to cut the slices out of the thigh of the ox, which he placed before his mother. And when they'd eaten a bit, he took up the cask with both hands and lifted it down onto the floor. And then he told his mother to come and drink, but it was still so high she couldn't reach up to it, so he caught her up and held her up so high. I don't know if anyone's ever done that with something, but he's doing it with his mother. And held her up to the edge of the cask while she drank. As for himself, he clambered up and hung down like a cat inside the cask while he drank. So when he had quenched his thirst, he took up the cask and put it back on the table and thanked the man for the good meal, and told his mother to come and thank him too, and afeared though she was, she dared do nothing else but thank the man. Then the lad sat down again alongside the man and began to gossip. And after they had sat a while, the man said, "Well, I must just go and get a bit of supper too." So he went to the table and ate up the whole ox, hooves and horns and all, and drained the cask to the last drop, and then went back and sat on the bench. "As for beds," he said, "I don't know what's to be done. I've only got one bed and a cradle. But we could get on pretty well if you would sleep in the cradle, and then your mother might lie in the bed yonder." "Thank you kindly, that'll do nicely," said the lad, and with that he pulled off his clothes and laid down in the cradle, but to tell you the truth, it was quite as big as a 4-poster. As for the old dame, she had to follow the man who showed her to the bed, though she was out of her wits with fear, because he was a big troll. "Well," thought the lad to himself, "'twill never do to go to sleep yet. I'd best lie awake and listen how things go as the night wears on." So after a while the man began to talk to the old dame, and at last he said, "We two might live here so happily together, could we only be rid of this son of yours."
"But do you know how to settle him? Is that what you're thinking of?"
That means kill him, said she.
"Nothing easier," said he.
At any rate, he would try. He would just say he wished the old dame would stay and keep the house for him for a day or two, and then he would take the lad out up to the hill to quarry cornerstones and roll down a great rock on him. All this the lad lay and listened to. Next day the troll, for it was a troll, as clear as day, asked if the old man would stay and keep house for him for a few days. And as the day went on, he took a great iron crowbar and asked the lad if he had a mind to go with him up the hill and quarry a few cornerstones, which are just building blocks. With all his heart, he said, and went with him. And so, after they'd split a few stones, the troll wanted him to go down below and look for cracks in the rock. And while he was doing this, the troll worked away and wearied himself with his crowbar till he moved a whole crag out of its bed, which came rolling right down on the place where the lad was. But he held it up till he could get on one side and then let it roll on. "Oh," said the lad to the troll, "now I see what you mean to do with me. You want to crush me to death. So just go down yourself and look after the cracks and rests in the rock, and I'll stand up above." The troll did not dare to do otherwise than the lad had bade him, because of how strong he clearly was. And the end of it was that the lad rolled down his own great rock, which fell upon the troll and broke one of his thighs, which we would nowadays call a femur. "Well, you are in a sad plight," said the lad as he strode down, lifted up the rock, and set the man free. After that, he had to put him on his back and carry him home, so he ran with him as fast as a horse and shook him so that the troll screamed and screeched as if a knife were run into him. And when he got home, he had to put the troll to bed, and there he lay in a sad pickle. Of course, he screeched because, he had a broken bone and he was bouncing. When the night wore on, the troll began to talk to the old dame again and to wonder how ever they could be rid of the lad. "Well," said the old dame, "if you can't hit on a plan to get rid of him, I'm sure I can't."
Let me see," said the troll. "I've got 12 lions in the garden. If they could only get a hold of the lad, they'd soon tear him to pieces."
So the old dame said it would be easy enough to get him there. She would sham sick and say she felt so poorly, nothing would do her any good but lion's milk. Which, by the way, I hope we all know what the problem is of trying to get lion's milk. All that the lad lay and listened to. And when he got up in the morning, his mother said she was worse than she looked, and she thought she would never be right again unless she could get some lion's milk. "Then I'm afraid you'll be poorly a long time, mother," said the lad, "for I'm sure I don't know where any is to be got."
"Oh, if that be all," said the troll, "there's no lack of lion milk if we only had the man to fetch it."
And then he went on to say how his brothers had a garden with 12 lions in it, and how the lad might have the key if he had a mind to milk the lions. So the lad took the key and a great big milking pail and strode off. And when he unlocked the gate, he got into the garden, and there stood all 12 lions up on their hind paws. Pardon me? Rampant and roaring at him. But the lad laid hold of the biggest, held him by the forepaws, and dashed him against the stalks and stones till there wasn't a bit of him left but those 2 paws. So when the rest saw that, they were so afraid that they crept up and lay at his feet like so many curs. After that, they followed him about wherever he went, and when he got home, they lay outside the house with their 4 paws on the doorsill. "Now, mother, you'll be soon well enough. You'll soon be well," said the lad when he went in, "for here is the lion's milk." He just milked a drop in the pail. But the troll, as he lay in bed, swore it was all a lie. He was sure the lad was not the man to milk lions. When the lad heard that, he forced the troll to get out of bed, threw open the door, and all the lions rose up and seized the troll, and at last the lad had to make them leave their hold. That night, the troll began to talk to the old dame again.
I'm sure I can't tell how to put this lad out of the way. He's so awful strong. Can't you think of some way?"
"No," said the old dame. "If you can't tell, I sure can't."
Give me a second. Inhaling what you should be swallowing.
"Well," said the troll, "I have 2 brothers in a castle. They are 12 times as strong as I am, and that's why I was turned out and to put up with this farm. They hold that castle, and round it here is an orchard with apples in it. Whoever eats those apples sleeps for 3 days and 3 nights. If we could only get the lad to go for the fruit, he wouldn't be able to keep from tasting the apples, and as soon as ever he fell asleep, my brothers would tear him into pieces."
So the old dame said she would sham sick again and say she could never be herself again until she tasted those apples, for she had set her heart on them. All this the lad lay and listened to. When the morning came, the old dame was so poorly that she couldn't utter a word but groans and sighs. She was sure she would never be well again unless she had some of those apples that grew in the orchard near the castle where the man's brothers lived, only she had no one to send for them. Oh, the lad was ready to go that instant. But the 11 lions went with him. So when he came to the orchard, he climbed up into the apple tree and ate as many apples as he could. He had scarce got down before he fell into a deep sleep. But the lions all lay around him in a ring. The 3rd day the troll's brothers came, but they did not come in man's shape. They came snorting like man-eating steeds, and wondered who it was that dared to be there, and said they would tear him to pieces, so small there would not be a bit of him left. But up rose the lions, and tore the trolls into small pieces, so that the place looked as if a dung heap had been tossed about. And when they had finished the trolls, they lay down again. The lad did not wake till in the afternoon, and when he got on his knees and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, he began to wonder what had been going on when he saw the marks of hooves. But when he went towards the castle, a maiden looked out of a window who'd seen all that had happened. I just want to say here, he heard the plan. No idea why he still ate the apples, to be honest. Why, if you know that, what does he gain? Why doesn't he just fake it? But second of all, why is he confused when he wakes up? And she said, "You may thank your stars you weren't in that tussle, else you may have lost your life." "What? I lose my life? No fear of that, I think," said the lad. So she begged him to come in that she might talk with him, for she hadn't seen a Christian soul ever since she came here. But when she opened the door, the lions wanted to go in too. But she got so frightened that she began to scream, and so the lad let them lie outside. Then the two talked, and the lad asked how it came that she, who was so lovely, could have put up with those ugly trolls. She never wished it, she said. 'Twas quite against her will. They had seized her by force, and she was the king of Arabia's daughter. Yeah, it's going that way. So they talked on, and at last she asked him what he would do, whether she could go back home, or whether he would have her to be his wife. And of course, he would have her, and she couldn't go home. Or shouldn't, anyways. After that, they went round the castle, and at last they came to a great hall where the trolls' two great swords hung high up on the wall. "I wonder if you're man enough to wield one of these." "Who, I?" said the lad. "'Twould be a pretty thing if it couldn't wield one of those." With that, he put 2 or 3 chairs, one on top of the other, jumped up, touched the biggest sword with his fingertips and tossed it up in the air and caught it again by the hilt, leapt down, and at the same time dealt such a blow with it on the floor that the whole hall shook. After he had thus got down, he thrust the sword under his arm and carried it about after with him. So when they had lived a little while in the castle, the princess thought she ought to go home to her parents and let them know what had become of her. So they loaded a ship, and she set sail from the castle. After she had gone, the lad had wandered about a little. He called to mind that he'd been sent out on an errand thither, and had come to fetch something for his mother's health, though he said to himself, after all, the old dame's not so bad, but she's all right by this time. Still, he thought he ought to go and just see how she was. So he went and found both the man and his mother quite fresh and hearty. "What wretches you are to live in this beggarly hut," said the lad. "Come with me up to my castle. You shall see what a fine fellow I am." Well, they were both ready to go, and on the way his mother talked to him and asked him how it was he got so strong. So already, why is he inviting them back? Number 2 is, why does the next page happen? "If you must know, I came out of that blue belt, which lay on that hillside that time when you and I were out begging," said the lad. "Have you got it still?" said she. "Yes," he said. "It's tied around his waist." "Might I see it?" Yes, she might. And with that, he pulled open his waistcoat and shirt to show it to her. And of course, she seized it with both hands, tore it off, and twisted it around her fist. Just telling you right now, here's the lesson, kids. If you got a hustle that's working, don't bring the people you're hustling in on it.
"Now," she cried, "what shall I do with a wretch such as you? I'll just give you one blow and dash your brains out."
"Far too good a death for such a scamp," said the troll. "No, let's first burn out his eyes, then turn him adrift in a little boat."
So they burned out his eyes and turned him adrift, in spite of his prayers and tears. But as the boat drifted, I guarantee you no one saw that coming. The lion swam after, and at last they laid hold of it and dragged it ashore on an island and placed the lad under a fir tree. They caught game for him, and they plucked the birds and made him a bed of down. But he was forced to eat his meat raw, and he was blind. At last, one day, the biggest lion was chasing a hare which was blind, for it ran straight over stock and stone. And the end was, it ran right up against a fir stump, tumbled head over heels across the field, and right into a spring. But lo, when it came out of the spring, it saw its way quite plain, and so saved its life. So, thought the lion, and went and dragged the lad to the spring and dipped him over head and ears in it. And when he got his sight again, he went down to the shore and made signs to the lions that they should all lie close together like a raft. Then he stood upon their backs while they swam with him to the mainland. Riding a raft of lions is one of the top 10 coolest things in all these stories. When he had reached the shore, he went up to the birchen copse and made the lions lie quiet. Then he stole up to the castle like a thief to see if he couldn't lay hands on his belt, and when he got to the door, he peeped through the keyhole, and there he saw his belt hanging over a door in the kitchen. So he crept softly in across the floor, for there was no one there. But as soon as he got a hold of that belt, he began to kick and stamp about as though he was mad. Just then his mother came rushing out. "Dear heart, my darling boy, do give me the belt again," she said. "Thank you kindly," said he. "Now you shall have the doom you passed on me." And he fulfilled it on the spot. When the old troll heard that, he came in and begged and prayed so prettily that he might not be smitten to death. "Well, you may live," said the lad. but ye shall undergo the same punishment ye gave me. And so he burned out the troll's eyes and turned him adrift on the sea in a little boat, but he had no lions to follow him. Now the lad was all alone, and he went about longing and longing for the princess. At last he could bear it no longer. He must set out to seek her. His heart was bent on having her, and so he loaded 4 ships and set sail for Arabia. For some time they had fair wind and fine weather, but after they lay windbound under a rocky island, so the sailors went ashore and strolled about to spend the time. And there they found a huge egg, almost as big as a little house. So they began to knock it about with large stones, but after a while they couldn't crack the shell. Then the lad came up with a sword to see what all the noise was about, and when he saw the egg, he thought it a trifle to crack it. So he took that giant sword that he'd gotten from the brothers, and with his strength from the belt, gave it one blow and the egg split. And out came a chicken as big as an elephant. "Now we've done wrong," said the lad. "This can cost us all our lives." And then he asked his sailors if they were men enough to sail to Arabia in 24 hours, if they got a fine breeze. Yes, they were good to do that, they said. So they set sail with a fine breeze and got to Arabia in 23 hours. As soon as they landed, the lad ordered all the sailors to go and bury themselves up to their eyes in a sandhill, so that they could just barely see the ships. The lads and the captains climbed a high crag and sat down under a fir. In a little while came a great big bird flying with an island in its claws, almost certainly the mother of that egg they broke. Too early for it to live. It let the island fall down on the fleet and sunk every ship. And after it had done that, it flew up into the sandhill and flapped its wings so that the wind nearly took the heads off the sailors. And it flew past the fir with such force that it turned the lad right about. But he was ready with his sword, and he gave the bird one blow and brought it down dead. After that, he went to town where everyone was glad because the king had got his daughter back. But now the king, not because of anything that just happened, by the way, in case you've lost the thread here, just because his daughter went and visited. But now the king had hidden her away somewhere himself and promised her hand as a reward to anyone who could find her. And this, though she was betrothed before. Now, as the lad went along, he met a man who had a white bear skins for sale. So he bought one of the hides and put it on, and one of the captains was to take an iron chain and lead him about. So he went into town and began to play pranks. At last the news came to the king's ears that there had never been such a fun in the town before, for here was a white bear that danced and cut capers just as it was bid. So a messenger came to say that the bear must come to the castle at once, for the king wanted to see its tricks. So when it got to the castle, everyone was afraid, for such a beast they'd never seen before. But the captain said there was no danger unless they laughed at it. They mustn't do that, else it would tear them to pieces. When the king heard that, he warned all the court not to laugh. But while the fun was going on, here comes another thing you're not expecting. In came one of the king's maids, and began to laugh and make game of the bear. And the bear flew at her and tore her, so that there was scarce a rag of her left. Then all the court began to bewail, and the captain most of all. Keeping in mind, not a bear. It's the hero of the story, dressed as a bear.
"Stuff and nonsense," said the king. "She's only a maid. Besides, it's more my affair than yours."
The views expressed in this story are not shared by the reader. When the show was over, it was late at night.
"It's no good your going away when it's so late," said the king. "The bear had best sleep here."
"Perhaps it might sleep in the ingle by the kitchen fire," said the captain.
Nay, said the king, it shall sleep up here. It shall have pillows and cushions to sleep on.
So a whole heap of pillows and cushions were brought, and the captain had a bed in a side room. But at midnight the king came with a lamp in his hand and a big bunch of keys and carried off the white bear. He passed along gallery after gallery through doors and rooms, upstairs and downstairs, till at last he came to a pier which ran out into the sea. Then the king began to pull and haul at posts and pins, so this one up and that one down, till at last a little house floated up to the water's edge, where he kept his daughter, for she was so dear to him that he'd hid her, which is not, by the way, how you express affection. Here's Rory's healthy modern insights. Don't lock people away because you love them. That's not love. So that no one could find her out. He left the white bear outside while she went in and told her how it danced and played its pranks. She said she was afraid and dared not look at it, but he talked her over, saying there was no danger if she wouldn't laugh. So they brought the bear in and locked the door, and it danced and played its tricks. So just to this point, the king has locked her in a boat so that no one can find her, and then locked her in there with a bear that he knows will kill her if she even hints at laughing at it. But just when the fun was at its height, the princess's maid began to laugh. Then the lad flew at her, maid, not the princess, and tore her to bits. And the princess began to cry and sob.
Stuff and nonsense, cried the king. All this fuss about a maid. I'll get you just a good a one again. But now I think the bear had best stay here till morning, for I don't care to have to go and lead it along all those galleries and stairs at this time of night.
Well, said the princess, if it sleeps here, I'm sure I won't. There's another pretty drawing of just the most horrible things. But just then the bear curled himself up and laid down by the stove, and it was settled at last that the princess should sleep there too, with a light burning. But as soon as the king had well gone, the white bear came and begged her to undo his collar. The princess was so scared she almost swooned away, but she felt about till she found the collar, and she had scarce undone it before the bear pulled his head off, and then she knew him again, and was so glad there was no end to her joy that her husband was the one who killed her maid, by the way. No, sorry, and she wanted to tell her father at once that her deliverer was come. But the lad would not hear of it. He would earn her once more, he said. So in the morning, when they heard the king rattling at the posts outside, the lad drew on the hide and lay down by the stove.
Well, has it lain still? The king asked.
I should think so, said the princess. It hasn't so much as turned or stretched itself once. When they got up to go to the castle again, the captain took the bear and led it away, and then the lad threw off the hide and went to a tailor and ordered clothes fit for a prince. And when they were fitted on, he went to the king and said he wanted to find the princess. And there he is asking for it with his very large sword.
You're not the first to have wished the same thing, said the king, but they have lost all their lives, for if anyone who tries can't find her in 24 hours, his life is forfeited.
Yes, the lad knew all that. Still, he wished to try, and if he couldn't find her, 'twas his lookout. Now, in the castle, there was a band that played sweet tunes, and there were fair maids to dance with, and so the lad danced away. And when 12 hours were gone, the king said,
I pity you with all my heart. You're so poor a hand at seeking, you will surely lose your life.
Stuff, said the lad. While there's life, there's hope. So long as there's breath in the body, there's no fear. We have lots of time. And so he went on dancing till there was only 1 hour left. Then he said he would begin to search.
"It's no use now," said the king. "Time's up." "Light your lamp." "Out with your big bunch of keys," said the lad, "and follow me whither I wish to go. There is still a whole hour left." So the lad went the same way which the king had led him the night before, and he bade the king unlock door after door till they came down to the pier which ran out into the sea. "It's no use, I tell you," said the king. "Time's up. This will only lead you right out into the sea." "Still 5 more minutes more," said the lad as he pulled and pushed at the posts and pins, and the house floated up. Sorry. Clicked on the wrong screen. "Now the time is up," bawled the king. "Come hither, headsman, take off his head." "Nay, nay," said the lad. "Stop a bit, for there are still 3 minutes. Out with the key, and let me get into this house." But there stood the king. He fumbled with his keys to draw out the time. At last he said he hadn't any key. "Well, if you haven't, I have," said the lad, and he gave the door such a kick that it flew to splinters inwards on the floor. At the door the princess met him, and told her father this was her deliverer, on whom her heart was set. So she had him, and this was how the beggar boy came to marry the daughter of the king of Arabia. There's a lot to process there. GS says, why does he want to win her fair and square? He just likes doing things the hard way. Yeah, I don't understand most of the choices he makes. I think, like, so much of the story is like a sort of macho show-off thing. Like, look at how strong, and I can do it anyway, even with all these barriers, and I can party for 23 of the 24 hours and still find her, and, like, there's a lot of, like, swagger to it. So I think that informs a lot of it. The choices he makes. You know, I guess if I was trying to think about it with my kind of metaphorical analysis hat on, just as that is the weirdest story you've read. It's pretty weird. It's up there. If I was trying to put my metaphorical hat on, I'd say like the belt seems to have something to do with maybe puberty. There's definitely this strange resentment of his mother in there and cruelty from her. But, the way it's just sort of ambles into some very odd directions. What the hell was about the egg? Where did that come from? Like, that's such classic, like, epic stuff where just weird things happen. There is an overarching goal, but for the most part, you just sort of see weird things. Like that, it is a style of story, right? Anyways. Seeing as it did take a little longer than I thought it would, I want to get right on to carrying on with our story from Mikko. I think we'll be able to get through 2, and then we'll have a little how you doing, and we'll call it a day. Yeah. So if you haven't seen this before, but you are catching up with the story, this is the story of Mikko the Fox. The fox, not necessarily always called Mikko, is a recurring character in folklore. And I don't really know why that is. I have standing theories. I kind of think it's a combination of 2 things. I think it's probably that the fox represents a kind of neutral, chaotic neutral forest spirit that was probably translated into just a fox when the Christianization happened, and a lot of sort of pagan gods were pulled out of folktales and replaced by happy little animal characters. Because it definitely behaves sort of like a trickster god might. It's got a kind of Loki element to it. It's friends with a wolf named Pekka the Wolf. Friends.
And it's friends with a bear named Osmo the bear. Friends. Definitely more friendly with the wolf than the bear. Has done quite a bit of evil things to the bear. I just want to say, before we go into this story, though... Well, here, I'll do my introduction because I'll put the content warning before we get to it. So, this story is from Mikko the Fox, from the book Mighty Mikko, a book of finished fairy tales and folk tales. Specifically, we are on to adventure 11, called Nurse Mikko. The content warning here is this is a pretty grim episode. If you have been keeping up with how Mikko the Fox is, it shouldn't be that surprising. But just so you know, things are going to die that you might not enjoy having die. Adventure 11, Nurse Mikko. The wolf's wife gave birth to 3 little cubs and then died, the wife. There is the whole history of like 300 or 400 years at least right there of the world.
You poor children, Pekka said. Your mother is dead, and there is no one to take her place. I must get you a nurse.
So he went through the forest hunting someone to take care of his motherless cubs. The white grouse offered her service, but when she sang a lullaby to show what a good nurse she could be, Pekka just shook his head.
I don't like your voice, he said. I can't take you.
Then Jussie, the hare, applied for the position.
You know I'm lame, he said.
Oh, you know I'm lame, he said. So quiet work like nursing would suit me.
Can you sing lullabies?
Pekka asked. Oh yes, listen. And Jussie began squealing that way that bunnies do.
Stop!
Pekka cried.
I don't like your voice either.
Just then Mikko the Fox came running up.
Good day, Pekka,
he said.
I hear you're out looking for a nurse for your sweet babies. Yes, Mikko, I am. Can you recommend one? I'd like the job myself,
said the fox.
You, Mikko?
Yes.
But you can't sing lullabies, can you?
Oh!
Yes, I sing them very beautifully. Listen. Hush-a-bye, sweet little cubs, hush-a-bye to sleep. Who best loves you, do you think? Who will give you food and drink? Who on faithful guard will keep? Mikko, Mikko! Hush-a-bye, sweet little cubs. Mikko loves you well, loves you each little pointed nose, loves your little scratchy toes, loves you more than he can tell. Mikko, Mikko!
Which, by the way, is where I think the name comes from. That very weird, I don't have to register for it, that very weird high-pitched yep that foxes make. I think that's what Mikko is meant to capture, the name. Pekka the wolf was charmed with Mikko's lullaby, because everyone's an idiot in this story, because ICGS has already nailed it. Uh-oh, Mikko's the last nurse you'd want. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, he said. I've never heard a sweeter lullaby. You're the very nurse I want. Come with me at once.
So Mikko went home with Pekka and took over the care of the 3 little wolf cubs.
I'll go off now and get them something to eat,
Pekka said. He came back after a while with the hind leg of a horse.
This will be enough for them to start on.
The fox shook his head.
I'm afraid it won't last them very long. They're beautifully healthy children with fine appetites. Poor little dears, Pekka said. Let me see them.
Not just now, Mikko insisted. They're asleep, and you mustn't be disturbed. Go out hunting again, and the next time you come home you shall see them. Pekka felt that the fox must be a very good nurse, indeed to be so strict. So he went off hunting again without seeing his children, and as soon as he was gone, Mikko, the rascal, ate up all the horse meat without giving the cubs one bite, and then, as he was still hungry, he ate one of the cubs. The next day he ate another cub, and the day following he ate the last of them. He was just finishing that last cub when the wolf came home and called in the door.
Now, nurse, here I come home to see my dear children. They're well, aren't they?
Very well, the fox declared,
but they've grown so big under my good care that the house isn't large enough now to hold them. You and me at the same time, and you and me at the same time. If you're coming in, I must get out first.
So the wolf stood aside as the fox came out and scampered away. And then the wolf went in, and of course all he could find of his dear children were their bones. Like, at what point does this just become a horror story? Then the wolf went in, and of course... You faithless nurse! He cried. In an awful rage, he ran after Mikko, who was about to overtake him when Mikko slipped into a crevice in the rock. Only one paw stuck out, and the wolf pounced on his paw and began gnawing at it. Say, Pekka, have you gone crazy? Do you think that biting that old root? I hope you don't think it's one of my paws. I'm sitting on all four of my paws. The wolf looked up to see whether this was true, and as quick as a flash, Mikko the rascal drew in his paw. So the poor old wolf, fooled again, went sadly home. There you go. Cheerful, right? Okay. This will be our last one for the night. So this story comes from Mikko the Fox, an epic tale or adventure. This is a story in the book Mighty Mikko, a book of Finnish fairy tales and folk tales, and we are on to Adventure 12. The Bear Says North. Now this one, unlike the last one, has a good sense of humor and isn't anywhere near as dark. One day, while Osmo the bear was prowling about the woods, he caught a grouse.
Pretty good, he thought to himself. Wouldn't the other animals be surprised if they knew old Osmo had caught a grouse?
He was so proud of his feat that he wanted all the world to know it, so holding the grouse carefully in his teeth, without injuring it, he began parading up and down the forest ways. They'll all certainly
envy me, this nice, plump grouse, he thought. And they won't be so ready to call me awkward and lumbering after this either.
Presently, Mikko the Fox sauntered by. He saw at once that Osmo was showing off, and he determined that the bear would not get the satisfaction of any admiration from him. So he pretended not to see the grouse at all. Instead, he pointed his nose upward and sniffed.
Ah! Ah!
Grunted Osmo, trying to attract attention to himself from Mikko. Ah! Mikko remarked casually. Is that you, Osmo? What way is the wind blowing today? Can you tell me? Osmo, of course, could not answer without opening his mouth, so he grunted again, hoping that Mikko would have to notice why he couldn't answer. But the fox didn't glance at him at all. With his nose still pointed upwards, he kept sniffing the air. It seems to me it's from the south, he said. Isn't it from the south, Osmo? the bear grunted.
You say it's from the south, Osmo. Are you sure?
Osmo repeated, growing every moment more impatient.
Oh, not from the south, you say? Then from what direction is it blowing?
By this time, the bear was so exasperated by Mikko's interest in the wind, when he should have been admiring the grouse that he forgot himself, he opened his mouth and roared, "North!" Of course, the instant he opened his mouth, the grouse flew away.
Now see what you've done, he stormed angrily. You made me lose my fine, plump grouse.
I? Mikko asked.
What had I to do with it?
You kept asking me about the wind until I opened my mouth. That's what you did.
The fox shrugged his shoulders.
Why did you open your mouth?
Well, you can't say north without opening your mouth, can you?
The bear demanded. The fox laughed heartily.
See here, Osmo. Don't blame me. Blame yourself. If I had had that grouse in my mouth and you'd asked me about the wind, I should never have said north.
What would you have said?
The bear asked. Mikko the rascal laughed harder than ever. Then he clenched his teeth and said,
East.
Which is a fun little linguistics joke. All right. Well, I've confused you. I've horrified you. And hopefully ended on a very corny joke. But thank you to anybody who has dropped by and enjoyed the show or anything. Please remember to like and subscribe. Tomorrow, if you are partaking in the Big Van Book Club, a reminder, we are reading chapters 7, 8, and 9 from part 2 of Francis Peck's The Broken Places. It's still a chance to easily get in on that. If you missed the first episode, it's up in the playlist called the Big Van Book Club. And I'll be back with Avalon Born tomorrow. And thank you so much again for everybody who dropped by and said hello. I'll keep the fire warm for you. Although in this weather, really, is there an ice fire? Have a good sleep. Thank you very much for GS for keeping me company. I'll see you tomorrow.